Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we are tackling a subject that feels incredibly heavy, but also absolutely necessary.
Mm.
We are looking at the life of a man who was, in so many ways, the last giant standing.
Indeed. We are talking about Mario Vargas Llosa.
And as we record this, it is January 2026.
Yeah.
The world is really still processing his death, which happened less than a year ago, back in April of 2025. It feels like the closing of a massive chapter in literary history, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like the final curtain call on a specific era of greatness.
Right.
You know, when we talk about the Latin American boom, that explosion of literature in the 60s and 70s that completely changed how the whole world reads fiction, Vargas Llosa was one of the central pillars.
Maybe the sturdiest pillar.
I think you could argue that. And with his passing, that era has definitively moved from living memory into the history books. We are no longer living in the time of the boom. We're now living in its aftermath.
And our mission today is to unpack a life that was, frankly, exhausting just to read about. I mean, this guy wasn't just a writer.
Yeah.
He was a politician, a literal nobleman, a marquess, a brawler, a Nobel Prize winner, and a man whose personal life was just as dramatic as any of his novels.
It's true. If you wrote his biography as a work of fiction, an editor would tell you to tone it down.
They'd say it's too implausible.
Exactly. He was often described as a cartographer of power. That was actually part of this citation when he won the Nobel Prize.
A cartographer of power. I like that.
It's perfect for him.
Yeah.
He mapped out how authority, rebellion, and, defeat work in the human soul. But what makes him so fascinating to study is that he didn't just write about these things from a desk in Paris or London.
No, he lived them.
He lived them. His life mirrored the turbulent history of Latin America in the 20th and 21st centuries. He was in the trenches.
Exactly. We have a massive stack of sources here. Biographical records, detailed breakdowns of his literary works, reports on his political shifts, and coverage of his global impact.
Yeah.
And we need to parse through all of it because, depending on who you ask, he was a hero of liberty or a traitor to the left.
Right. He was a disciplined artist or a tabloid scandal waiting to happen.
He was all of it.
And that tension is exactly where we should start. I mean, if you want to understand Vargas Llosa, you have to look at the central conflict that defined his entire life, the individual versus the oppressive structure. Whether that structure was a military academy, a dictatorship, a fanatic ideology, or even his own family, he spent 89 years fighting against anything that tried to put him in a cage.
Right. So let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Because his origin story, it has a plot twist that sounds like something out of a soap opera or a telenovela, to be precise.
Mm-hmm. It really does. So he was born in Arequipa, Peru in 1936 to a middle-class family. But the defining event of his childhood happened before he could even remember it. His parents separated just a few months before he was born.
And this is where the deception comes in. This isn't just a quiet separation. It's a full-on cover-up.
It's a total cover-up. He was raised by his mother and her family, the Llosas. They lived in Arequipa, then they moved to Cochabamba in Bolivia, and later to Piura in northern Peru. And for the first 10 years of his life, Mario was told a lie.
A huge lie.
He was led to believe that his father was dead.
Can you just imagine that? You're growing up, you're surrounded by this nurturing maternal family. His grandfather, who managed a cotton farm, basically sustained them.
Right. He's the center of attention, surrounded by aunts and a doting mother. He has this image of a father who is gone, maybe a tragic figure, maybe a hero in his mind, but definitely absent.
And then, at age 10,
the reveal. It happened in Piura in 1946. He meets his father, Ernesto Vargas Maldonado, for the very first time. And it turns out, not only is his father very much alive, but his parents have decided to get back together.
that has to be traumatic. You go from my father is a ghost to my father is this stranger standing in the living room.
Yeah.
And from what I've read, Ernesto wasn't exactly Father of the Year material.
No, far from it. And it wasn't a happy reunion for young Mario at all. The family moved to Lima, specifically to the suburb of Magdalene del Mar.
And the whole environment shifted.
Drastically. He went from a pampered, affectionate environment in his grandfather's house where imagination was encouraged, where books were a good thing, to living with a father who was authoritarian, harsh, and frankly resentful of Mario's literary interests.
Wow.
This sudden imposition of discipline and, this very toxic masculine authority was a complete shock to his system.
It sounded like his father viewed Mario's love of reading and poetry as a weakness, like it was something that needed to be beaten out of him.
That's a very accurate way to put it. His father feared his son was becoming effeminate because he was raised by women. So when Mario was 14, his dad decided he needed to be straightened out.
It needed a dose of real manhood.
Yes. And here is where the origin story turns into, well, kind of a horror movie for a sensitive kid.
This is a huge moment.
In 1950, his father sent him to the Leoncio Prado Military Academy in Lima.
Leoncio Prado, you should keep that name in mind because it is going to come up again in a very big way.
It was a boarding school and, by all accounts, just a brutal environment. It was a microcosm of Peruvian society at its worst.
How so?
Well, you had boys from all different social classes and races thrown together, but ruled by this rigid, violent hierarchy. Bullying was rampant. Hazing was basically institutionalized. For a sensitive boy who loved to read, it was hell.
But if we're looking at this from a literary perspective, this was the foundational trauma, wasn't it? This is the crucible.
Absolutely. This specific event, being thrust from that maternal world into this harsh, violent, masculine military world, it gave him the raw material for his first masterpiece. He learned about power dynamics there.
Right.
He learned how the strong crush the weak and how institutions protect the strong. He hated every second of it, but it made him a writer.
But he didn't just sit there and take it. He started rebelling pretty early on, right?
Oh, yeah, he did. He actually withdrew from the academy before graduating and finished his studies back in Piura. But the rebellion took other forms, too. He started working as a journalist at age 16 for a local paper called La Industria.
16.
16. And then, in 1953, when he went to university at San Marcos in Lima, he did what many young, angry intellectuals did at the time. He embraced communism.
Which makes a certain kind of sense. You look around at the corruption and inequality in Peru, and you look for a system that promises to fix it all.
Of course.
If the establishment is your abusive father in that horrible military school, then the anti-establishment must be the solution.
Exactly. He joined a small communist group, a cell named Cahuaid. It was a reaction to the endemic inequality he saw everywhere. But his rebellion against authority also bled into his personal life.
Well, this is a big one.
At age 19, he did something that shocked his family even more than the communism. He married Julia Urquidy.
And we have to clarify who Julia was, because the family tree gets a little tangled here.
It does. She was his maternal uncle's sister-in-law.
Okay, so let's be crystal clear. Not a blood relative, no genetic issues here, but definitely family in the social sense of the word. And she was older.
Significantly older, 10 years older. He was 19, she was 29 and divorced. In conservative Catholic Lima in the 1950s, this was a massive scandal.
It was a huge act of defiance.
The biggest. It was a massive defiance of family norms, of social expectations. It was him asserting his independence in the most dramatic way possible. He was basically shouting, "I choose who I love, regardless of what any of you think."
It sounds chaotic, but it also seemed to fuel his work ethic, like he had to prove everyone wrong.
It absolutely marked the beginning of his serious literary grind. He was working multiple jobs to support them. He was a radio news editor. He was cataloging names on tombstones.
Oh, wait, really? On tombstones?
Yes, whatever he could do to pay the bills. And then he was writing short stories all night, trying to find his voice.
And finding that voice didn't take long.
Yeah.
Let's jump to the 1960s. This is the era of the Latin American boom.
And we throw around this term, the boom, but we need to really explain what that meant in the 1960s. Before this, Latin America was seen by the West essentially as, a banana farm that occasionally had coups.
Cultural backwater.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Europe and the U.S., they weren't reading books from Peru or Colombia.
Barely.
And then suddenly you have this explosion. It wasn't just that the books were good. It was that they were new. They were doing something different. They took the modernism of Europe, Faulkner, Joyce, and they mixed it with the brutal political reality and the mythology of Latin America.
And exploding onto the scene is this young Peruvian guy with a book called The Time of the Hero, or in Spanish, La Ciudad y los Perros.
Published in 1963. And remember, Leoncio Prado, the military academy.
Oh, I remember. The place where he was sent to be straightened out.
This book was a direct fictionalization of his time there. It portrayed the academy not as a place of honor and discipline, but as a snake pit of bullying, corruption, gambling, and cruelty.
So he just aired all the dirty laundry.
All of it. He showed how the institution mocked the very moral standards it was supposed to uphold.
And the reaction in Peru was, was it explosive?
To put it mildly, critically, it was a smash hit. It won the Premio de la Crítica Española. But the Peruvian military establishment, they were absolutely furious. Generals publicly attacked the novel. They called it the work of a degenerate mind.
I love this detail. They claimed he was paid by Ecuador to undermine the Peruvian army.
That was the official accusation. You have to remember, Peru and Ecuador have had border conflicts for decades, so accusing him of being a paid agent of Ecuador was a very specific way to paint him as a traitor.
It's so over the top.
And they even burned copies of the book in the courtyard of the academy. A public book burning.
They burned the books. I feel like if you're a writer, having the army burn your books is basically the best marketing campaign you could ever ask for.
It kind of is, isn't it?
It proves you matter. It proves your words have power.
And it established his role immediately. He wasn't just a storyteller. He was a public enemy of established authority. He was willing to tell the ugly truth about sacred institutions. He was dangerous.
So he's on the map. He's famous. And then he follows it up with The Greenhouse in 1965. Now, looking at our notes on his writing style, this is where things get technically very complicated. Critics talk about this technique he used, interlacing dialogues, or vasos comunicantes.
Right. The Greenhouse, or La Casa Verde, is a dense, complex novel. It's set in two places, the desert city of Piura and the Amazon jungle. But what makes it such a landmark of the boom is that technique.
Okay, hold on. I've read notes on this, and complex feels like an understatement.
Yeah.
You compared it to movie editing in our pre-show chat, but isn't it more aggressive than that?
Much more aggressive. In a movie, you see a cut. You have a visual cue that you've changed scenes. In Vargas Llosa's prose, you don't.
So what does that feel like for the reader?
Well, you might be reading a sentence spoken by a character in 1945 in some remote jungle outpost, and the very next sentence, with no paragraph break sometimes in the same line, is a response from a completely different character 20 years later in a city brothel.
So he's collapsing time. He's just mashing different timelines together.
Exactly. He's forcing you to experience time not as a straight line, but as a simultaneous event. It is disorienting by design. He had this idea of the total novel, a book that consumes reality from all sides at once. He didn't want you to just read a story. He wanted you to feel the chaos of a society where the past is constantly intruding on the present, where everything is connected.
That sounds absolutely exhausting to read.
It demands an active reader. You can't just passively consume the text, you have to work at it. But once you get the rhythm, it's hypnotic.
And the critics loved it.
They went wild for it. This book won the first ever Romulo Gallegos Prize in 1967, competing against giants like Onetti and Garcia Marquez. It solidified his place in the canon. He was no one-hit wonder.
And then, just to cap off this incredible decade, he releases what many people think is his greatest work, Conversation in the Cathedral in 1969.
Many critics, and even Vargas Llosa himself at times, consider this his monumental masterpiece. It's a massive, bitter, sprawling novel.
The plot sounds deceptively simple on the surface. It's just a conversation at a bar, right?
Yeah. On the surface, yes. It's a 4-hour conversation between Santiago Zavala, who is the disillusioned son of a government minister, and Ambrosio, who was his father's chauffeur. They happen to meet at a dog pound, and they go to a dive bar called the Cathedral.
But through this one conversation, they're basically dissecting an entire era of Peruvian history.
Exactly that. They are peeling back the layers of the Odría dictatorship, which ruled Peru in the late 40s and 50s. Santiago is searching for the truth about his father's role in the murder of a notorious underworld figure.
But the real theme is bigger than that.
Oh, much bigger. The broader theme is about how dictatorship corrupts everything. It doesn't just kill people, it destroys families, it destroys trust. It creates this pervasive sense of hopelessness that seeps into every corner of life.
It's described as his most bitter novel.
It is, because at the end of Santiago's quest, there's no redemption.
Yeah.
He finds only dead ends and moral ambiguity. It portrays a society where integrity is impossible because the system relies on complicity from everyone.
And there's that famous line from the book.
At what precise moment had Peru fucked itself up? That question just haunts the whole novel. It's the central question.
So by the end of the 60s, he's the undisputed master of this serious, political, structurally complex novel. But then, in the 70s, he takes this huge left turn, or maybe a funny turn.
The discovery of humor. Yes, it's a fascinating shift. After the heavy, dark tone of Conversation in the Cathedral, he writes Captain Pantoja and the Special Service in 1973.
And this book sounds hilarious. It's about the army hiring prostitutes for soldiers.
It is a satire, but what's amazing is that it's based on reality. Vargas Llosa had actually witnessed this, the Peruvian army trying to service its soldiers in remote jungle outposts to prevent them from harassing the local women.
So what does he do with that idea?
He creates this character, Captain Pantoja, who is the most efficient by-the-book officer you can imagine, and he's assigned to set up a special service of prostitutes.
And he writes it as a bureaucracy.
That's the joke. He treats it with the same administrative seriousness as a supply chain for boots or ammunition. The book is filled with memos, requisitions, efficiency reports on the prostitutes. It's a brilliant parody of his own earlier work, like The Greenhouse. He takes the same themes, military, prostitution, the jungle, but instead of tragedy, he plays it as farce.
Which shows incredible range. And then he mines his own life for comedy with Aunt Julia and the scriptwriter in 1977.
This is a fan favorite for a reason. It's a semi-autobiographical novel about his first marriage to Julia Urquidi.
His aunt-in-law.
Right. It mixes the story of their forbidden romance, the young writer, the older divorced aunt-in-law, with the story of a crazy radio soap opera writer who starts losing his mind and mixing up the plots of his 10 different shows.
But this one had real-world fallout, didn't it?
Oh, yes. Julia Urquidi was not happy at all. She felt he exaggerated the negatives of their relationship and really minimized how much she supported him when he was a nobody.
So she wrote a book in response.
She did. She actually wrote a rebuttal memoir called What Little Vargas Didn't Say.
Ouch. The literary clapback.
It's a rare thing to see, the subject of a famous novel writing a rebuttal. But it showed that using real life as raw material, it has consequences.
Speaking of conflict, here is where it gets really interesting. We have to talk about the feud of the century.
Yes.
We mentioned the Latin American boom was this tight-knit group. Vargas Llosa and Gabriel Garcia Marquez were best friends. They were neighbors in Barcelona. Vargas Llosa even wrote his doctoral thesis on Garcia Marquez. He called it Story of a Deicide. They were inseparable.
They were the two pillars of the boom. And then in 1976, at a theater in Mexico City, it all ended in a single moment.
The punch.
The punch. Vargas Llosa walked up to Garcia Marquez, who opened his arms to hug him, and Vargas Llosa just punched him square in the face, knocked him down, gave him a massive black eye.
There's a famous photo of Garcia Marquez with that black eye.
There is, and they never spoke again.
Never. A 30-year silence until death.
So what happened? I mean, do we actually know?
Well, neither of them ever publicly explained it. They took the secret to their graves. But mutual friends have filled in the gaps over the years. The consensus is that it was personal, and it involved Vargas Llosa's second wife, Patricia. Patricia, who was also his cousin.
Yes. After he divorced Julia in 1964, he married his first cousin, Patricia Llosa, in 1965. The story goes that while Vargas Llosa was away, some sources say he was pursuing another woman on a cruise ship. Patricia was distraught.
Okay.
And Garcia Marquez tried to console her. When Vargas Llosa returned, Patricia told him something about Garcia Marquez's behavior, or maybe his advice to her, that caused the explosion.
Consoling can be interpreted in many ways, I suppose.
Indeed. But there's a deeper layer here. The punch wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. By 1976, they were standing on opposite sides of a massive ideological canyon.
This is the second act of his life, and honestly, this is the part that confuses people the most. How does the guy who wrote the ultimate anti-military novels, who was an early supporter of Fidel Castro, end up running for president on a platform of radical capitalism? That is a wild swing.
It looks wild from the outside, but if you look closer, there is a consistent thread. And that thread is liberty. Vargas Llosa was always obsessed with liberty.
Okay.
In the 50s and 60s, he thought the main threat to liberty was the bourgeoisie and American imperialism.
So he goes left, he supports the Cuban Revolution.
Right. But then comes 1971, the Padilla affair.
Explain this, because it seems to be the absolute pivot point for him and so many other intellectuals.
It was. The Castro regime arrested a poet named Heberto Padilla. They imprisoned him, essentially, for writing poems that were deemed critical of the revolution. They forced him to perform this Stalinist-style public confession where he admitted to being a traitor and even denounced his own wife.
And for Vargas Llosa, that's not just politics. That's personal. That's a writer realizing, wait a minute, this system comes for people like me.
Exactly. He realized that a dictatorship of the left silences you just as effectively as a dictatorship of the right. He was horrified. He signed a famous letter of protest, and Fidel Castro called him and the other signatories traitors. That was the break. The friendship was over.
And he didn't just drift to the center. He went full classical liberal.
He swung hard. He started reading Karl Popper, Friedrich Hayek, Isaiah Berlin. He came to the conclusion that the only real protection against the structure, whether it's a general or a commissar, is individual liberty and the free market.
So in his mind, it wasn't a betrayal of his principles.
No, it was an evolution of his method for protecting them. The goal was always freedom. The enemy just changed.
And he didn't just write about it. He decided to do the most dangerous thing a writer can do: run for political office.
The 1990 Peruvian presidential election. This is such a fascinating case study. In 1987, he helped form the Liberty Movement to protest the nationalization of banks, and by 1990, he was running as the candidate for the Democratic Front Coalition, or Frelimo.
And what was his platform? Because this is where it gets really controversial.
Radical austerity. He was brutally honest with people. He told the Peruvian people that the economy was completely broken, inflation was at thousands of %, and the only way to fix it was a shock therapy program. Privatization, free trade, firing legions of bureaucrats.
Okay, pause. I have to play devil's advocate here. That sounds like political suicide. You're running for office in a country with massive poverty, and your opening pitch is, "I'm going to make your life much harder for a while." Was he naive or just arrogant?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? His critics called it arrogance, the great intellectual looking down from his ivory tower, lecturing the poor on economics. They said he was totally out of touch with the daily suffering of the average Peruvian.
It feels disconnected. Like it's easy to talk about necessary pain when you're a famous author living comfortably in London or Madrid.
And that's a fair point.
You know.
But from Vargas Llosa's perspective, he saw it as a moral imperative. He believed that lying to the poor, promising them magic solutions that didn't exist, was the ultimate form of disrespect.
So he wanted to treat the electorate as adults.
Exactly. He wanted to say, this is the medicine we need. It will taste awful, but it's the only way to get better.
Which is noble, sure. But in politics, adults usually want to hear that everything is going to be fine without any pain. And then along comes Fujimori.
Alberto Fujimori, an agricultural engineer, the son of Japanese immigrants. Literally nobody knew who he was. He showed up riding a tractor, campaigning in the countryside, and his slogan was simply, "No shock."
A simple, powerful message.
And he painted Vargas Llosa as the candidate of the white, wealthy Lima elite.
And it worked.
It worked brilliantly. Vargas Llosa won the first round but didn't get a majority. In the runoff election, Fujimori crushed him in a landslide.
And the irony, and this is the part that always gets me, is what happened after Fujimori won.
It is the ultimate, most bitter irony. Fujimori won by campaigning against Vargas Llosa's shock plan, but once he took office, Fujimori turned around and implemented many of Vargas Llosa's exact neoliberal policies. They called it the Fuji shock.
But he did it while dismantling democracy.
Yes, he implemented the economic plan while staging a self-coup and becoming an authoritarian leader.
So Vargas Llosa lost the election, but his economic ideas won. But they were implemented by a dictator he absolutely despised.
Precisely. It was a brutal defeat. He wrote a fantastic memoir about it called A Fish in the Water. And after that loss, he largely moved to Madrid, acquired Spanish citizenship in 1993, and became this transatlantic public intellectual.
But even in defeat, he couldn't help but speak his mind. We have to talk about the perfect dictatorship moment, because in the footage of this event, you can practically see the air leave the room.
It was 1990, just after he lost the election. He was invited to Mexico City for this prestigious intellectual gathering, and it was being broadcast live on Televisa, which was basically the propaganda arm of the Mexican government at the time.
And the ruling party, the PRI, had been in power for 61 years straight.
And the audience is packed with PRI officials. The moderator is Octavio Paz, Mexico's great Nobel-winning poet. Vargas Llosa is the guest of honor. He's supposed to be polite.
But he wasn't.
Instead, he leans into the microphone and just calmly dismantles the entire Mexican political system. He tells them, Japan is not a dictatorship, but Mexico. Mexico is the perfect dictatorship.
Wow. Perfect because it doesn't look like one on the surface.
Exactly his point. He said, it has the camouflage of democracy. It has elections, but you can't win them. It has a press, but the press is bought. It suppresses dissent not with gulags, but with jobs and bribes and subtle pressure.
I read that Octavio Paz actually tried to cut him off. He was panicking.
He tried to do damage control immediately. It was incredibly awkward on live TV. Imagine walking into someone's house for dinner, and while they're serving the soup, you announce to the whole table that the host is a con artist.
That is Mario Vargas Llosa.
He embarrassed everyone, but the phrase stuck. For decades, the perfect dictatorship became the defining description of 20th century Mexican politics.
It just shows that he could not help himself. He had to speak what he saw as the truth. regardless of the setting or the consequences.
That is the core of his character, the absolute refusal to be polite when liberty is at stake.
So, he's lost the election. He's living mostly in Europe. You might think his best writing days were behind him at this point, but he actually enters this incredible new phase of literary masterpieces.
It does. And this phase is marked by a deep, almost obsessive exploration of fanaticism. If his early work was about military and state dictatorships, his later work asks, why do human beings follow irrational causes? Why do we kill for an idea?
Let's talk about The War of the End of the World, published in 1981, so actually before his presidential run.
Right.
But it really signals this shift in his focus.
This is his first major novel set outside of Peru. It's set in 19th century Brazil, and it's based on a real and truly insane historical event, the War of Canudos.
Set the scene for us. What was this war?
It's the backlands of Bahia, a harsh, dry, impoverished region. And you have this millenarian cult that springs up, led by a charismatic figure called the Counselor. He preaches that the end of the world is coming and that the new Brazilian Republic is the Antichrist.
And people follow him.
Thousands of poor, desperate people flock to him, and they build this city from scratch called Canudos.
So it's the state versus a cult.
Yes, but this is the genius of the book. Vargas Llosa shows the fanaticism on both sides. The religious zealots are irrational, yes. They are waiting for the apocalypse. But the secular Republicans in Rio, they are also blinded by their own ideology.
How so?
They refuse to see these people as human beings with legitimate grievances. They see the cult as a monarchist conspiracy funded by the British. They're just as fanatical in their belief in progress and reason, so they send the army to wipe them out.
And the result is a massacre.
A total slaughter. It's a massive Tolstoyan novel about how blind belief on any side leads to catastrophe. It shows that the civilized soldiers can be just as barbaric as the fanatics they are trying to destroy.
And then, in 2000, he drops The Feast of the Goat.
La Fiesta del Chivo. This is arguably his greatest late career work. It's about the Dominican Republic and the dictator Rafael Trujillo.
Trujillo's a monster, an absolute monster, a true monster. He ruled for 31 years. He renamed the capital city after himself. He orchestrated the Parsley Massacre, killing thousands of Haitians. And the novel structures this horror through three interwoven strands. You have Urania Cabral, a woman returning to the island after 30 years to finally confront her father, who was one of Trujillo's cronies. You have the assassins waiting in a car on a dark highway to ambush and kill Trujillo. And you have Trujillo himself in his final pathetic days.
So it's a psychological study of power.
And of the rot that power creates. It explores how authoritarianism isn't just about force, it's about humiliation. Trujillo maintained power by systematically humiliating the men around him, making them complicit in his crimes so they couldn't possibly turn against him.
How did he do that?
He would sleep with their wives and daughters, force them to do degrading things in public, and they would have to smile and thank him for the honor. It's a terrifying, brilliant book about the psychology of tyranny.
We should also touch on the controversy regarding the Uchurake Commission, because that also influenced his writing during this period. This was back in 1983. The Peruvian president, Fernando Belaunde, asked Vargas Llosa to lead a commission investigating the murder of 8 journalists in the remote Andes.
What did they find?
The commission concluded that indigenous villagers had killed the journalists, mistaking them for terrorists from the Shining Path, the Maoist guerrilla group that was terrorizing the country.
And the backlash was severe.
Extremely. The left accused him of a government cover-up, that he was protecting the military, who were also in the area. Anthropologists accused him of paternalism and of fundamentally misunderstanding Andean culture. It was a really bruising experience for him.
But being Vargas Llosa,
he turned it into art. It directly inspired his novel, Death in the Andes.
it seems like every single trauma in his life, public or private, eventually became a novel.
That is the mark of a great writer. Nothing is ever wasted.
So we arrive at 2010, the Nobel Prize in Literature. Finally.
Yes, long overdue, many would say. The Swedish Academy cited his cartography of structures of power and his trenchant images of the individual's resistance, revolt, and defeat.
That cartography of power again.
It's the perfect summary. And in his acceptance speech, he got very emotional.
He did. He spoke about carrying Peru deep inside me. But he also spoke of his love for Spain. He said, "I am a Peruvian citizen, and I am a Spanish citizen." He was truly a man of two worlds. And speaking of two worlds, his personal life took one last, very public, dramatic turn in his twilight years.
Yes. After 50 years of marriage to Patricia, who was basically his manager, his anchor, the mother of his 3 children. He left her.
In 2015, he was 79 years old.
He was 79. He left her for Isabel Preisler.
And for those of our listeners who don't follow Spanish celebrity culture, Isabel Preisler is a big deal.
She is the queen of hearts, the queen of the gossip magazines, a massive socialite in Spain, the ex-wife of singer Julio Iglesias. It was a huge shock. Vargas Llosa went from the serious literary pages to the cover of Hola magazine.
Right. He was suddenly walking red carpets, living this very high-profile, glamorous life in Madrid mansions.
Did it last?
It lasted until 2022. They split up. But it showed that even in his 80s, he was still chasing something, passion, novelty, life. He refused to just sit in a rocking chair and be the old writer.
And he also became a literal nobleman around this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
King Juan Carlos I of Spain made him the Marquess of Vargas Llosa in 2011. So you have a man who started as a middle-class boy in Arequipa, became a communist revolutionary, then a neoliberal politician, and ended his life as a Spanish Marquess.
You can't make it up.
Let's talk about his politics in these final years, because he didn't mellow out at all. If anything, he seemed to get even more controversial.
He became a staunch, and I mean staunch, defender of what he considers liberal values, but what many people saw as a drift to the hard right. He supported neoliberalism aggressively. He endorsed figures like Javier Milei in Argentina and José Antonio Cast in Chile.
And the Keiko Fujimori situation in Peru.
That was the most painful dilemma for many of his followers. Remember, Alberto Fujimori was his nemesis. Keiko is Alberto's daughter and political heir. In 2011, Vargas Llosa called her the worst option for Peru.
But then he changed his mind.
In 2021, she was in a runoff against Pedro Castillo, a far-left teacher with a Marxist party behind him, and Vargas Llosa endorsed Keiko.
He called her the lesser of two evils.
He did. He genuinely believed that Castillo represented a path to Venezuelan-style socialism, a catastrophe which he feared more than the corruption and authoritarian tendencies of the Fujimori clan.
But it cost him a lot of prestige.
A huge amount, especially among centrists and the left. He was accused by intellectuals in France and elsewhere of contributing to political polarization.
But he stuck to his guns.
Always. He believed that silence was the worst sin for an intellectual. He would rather be wrong and loud than right and silent.
And that brings us to the end. April 13, 2025, in Lima, Peru.
He died at age 89. His son Alvaro announced he was at peace and surrounded by family, including his ex-wife Patricia.
It's interesting that he died in Lima. Despite living in Madrid for so long, despite the Marquess title, he went home.
He did, and the reaction was massive. National mourning in Peru, visits from world leaders like Macron and Pedro Sanchez, and from leaders all across the Latin American spectrum. Even those who completely disagreed with his politics acknowledged his literary genius.
And he didn't leave us without one last gift.
His final novel, Le dedico mi silencio, which translates to I give you my silence. It was published in 2023 and announced as his last work of fiction.
So looking back at this massive, contradictory, brilliant life, what is the legacy?
I mean, he was a giant who brought Latin American literature to the world stage. That's undeniable. But beyond the books, I think his legacy is the very stance of the intellectual in public life.
The public intellectual.
Yes. He was a man who refused to stay in his lane. He changed his mind from Marxist revolutionary to aristocratic liberal Marquess, and he did it all publicly, loudly, and fearlessly. He forced you to argue with him.
I will leave our listeners with a final thought, a question to chew on. Vargas Llosa once said that literature was fire, an act of rebellion against the imperfections of life. Yet he ended his life as the ultimate insider. A Nobel Prize winner, a Marquess, a member of the Académie Française, the establishment personified.
So it raises the question, does the rebel inevitably become the institution? Or did he somehow manage to change the institution from the inside?
That is something to think about. If you haven't read them, don't let the size of the book scare you. Pick up The Feast of the Goat or The Time of the Hero. Go see that cartography of power for yourself.
It's definitely worth the journey.
Thanks for listening. Keep diving deep.